Welcome back to another edition of Keeping Up with the Commanders. It's Season 5, Episode 3 here on Keeping Up with the Commanders. I'm your host, Mason Kenahan, and today I am joined by Matthew Heiserman, a young guy who's been pretty much killing it right now on Commanders Twitter recently. So I wanted to talk to you today about some Terry McLaurin situation because you had a pretty important interview, I would say, that brought a lot of information to Commanders Twitter for this Terry McLaurin situation. So I'm going to basically here first talk about what you learned from that interview. And then we're going to go into a breakout players draft. So we're going to go back and forth, each draft 3 players that we think could break out for the Commanders this upcoming season. And capping things off, I do want to take a look at all of the UDFAs going into, I guess we're already in training camp now, but here early on in the first couple of weeks of training camp, who are some UDFAs that could potentially make a name for themselves in the first preseason games? But first, Matthew, how are you doing today?
I'm doing good. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, it's going to be a blast. We've got a lot to talk about here on this week's episode. Let's kick things started, though, with Terry McLaurin. I don't want to spend too much time on it because I feel like every podcast I've done so far this season has just been about Terry.
Same
But I do want to talk a little bit about it. You had an interview with ESPN's Jeremy Fowler earlier this week, and it really kind of shined some more light and maybe brought some more some insights into the Terry situation from an insider's point of view. So, what did you learn the most from your interview with Jeremy?
So I have 3 quotes that I pulled up here that I want to read off, and these were probably the 3 things that stood out to me the most. So the first one was when he said, "As far as I know, they're just looking at more of a slight increase from where he's at." In that quote, he's talking about obviously Washington looking to pay him just a little more from what his contract is right now, which is $23.5 million per year, and that feels like a low ball. He said that maybe Washington was looking at range closer to what some of the maybe, you know, the worst elite receivers are. Maybe your T. Higgins of the world, right? Not your top guys, but the guys who could still be considered elite, but are maybe making 28 mil, 27 mil, around that range. But Terry wants closer to what the other wide receivers in the market are getting. We saw Garrett Wilson get 32 and a half, and it feels like that's probably at least what Terry McLaurin is looking at right now. And then he also said, when I asked about the urgency for Washington to get this deal done, he said Washington hasn't shown the need to rush. I think that's because they don't love the wide receiver market and how high it's gone, which is kind of just what I alluded to, and the fact that Washington's maybe they're avoiding really caving in and just paying him what the rest of the market has gotten. I think Peters is really trying to take his time with this deal and get the best possible deal he can. And then the last quote is about McLaurin potentially requesting a trade, where Fowler said, "I know from Terry's side, the sense I get is that anything is possible. The implication there is that a trade request could be on the table at some point if this continues to go poorly." Now, he did state it would have to go really poorly for that to happen, but I do think it's just something to keep in the back of your mind that you can't totally rule out a potential trade request from McLaurin going forward.
Yeah, you mentioned the kind of gaps in where maybe Terry's group stands in terms of how much money they want per year versus, Adam Peters and the Commander side of things. If you look at the wide receiver contracts right now, it's kind of split into 3 different groups. You've got, like you mentioned, the elite wide receivers, AJ Brown, Garrett Wilson, DK Metcalf, all in the range of 32 million. And then, maybe you can not say all of them are maybe elite caliber in terms of talent, but more so that's what they're getting paid as. Then you get that next group of receivers, the Amon-Ra St. Brown, Tyreek Hill, Brandon Ayuk. All of those guys are getting $30 million per year, which is $2 million less than, the elite guys. And then there's that third group, like you mentioned, with T. Higgins, Jalen Waddle, DJ Moore, 27, 28 million, which I think is where, like you mentioned, Washington is trying to get Terry around that range, but Terry probably wants to be in that second tier or potentially even in that first tier of wide receivers, which Washington, of course, as of now, doesn't seem like they want to go. But again, things are fluid. Things can change. It was a very insightful interview as a Commanders fan, watching that, learning about the situation from an NFL insider. So where can people find the full interview that you did with Jeremy?
Absolutely. It's on the DMV Football Gauntlet YouTube channel. I believe it's the handle is at DMV_football. And then you can also follow me on Twitter at MatthewH_Haven, where I was making some posts about it. I put the link to that interview. It's my pinned post right now. So you can follow me on there. Check it out.
Yeah, it was definitely very insightful to learn more about the Terry situation and the kind of things going on
Mhm.
money wise between the two sides. Now though, let's move on because I've heard about Terry enough in the last couple of weeks.
Yep.
We're going to be talking about some potential breakout players for the Washington Commanders.
Mhm.
We're going to do this draft style. So, how this is going to work is you're going to get the first pick, I'll get the second, and then I'll just let you have the first pick every round. So, you'll get the third pick, I'll get the fourth, fifth, sixth.
You sure?
We should
I'll do Snake if you want.
you know, yeah, Snake is kind of weird though. If we're only drafting three,
Yeah.
it's low. So I've
Okay.
got some names though that I don't think you might pick.
Mhm.
So I think
Mhm.
I'm ready for this. But I'll let you have the first pick here.
Mhm.
There's a lot of maybe it's the oldest team in the league, but there's a lot of young talent
Mhm.
that have
Yeah.
yet to see playing time on the field. So who would you select first overall in this breakout players draft for the Commanders?
Yeah, I came prepared with 6 guys in case you
Yeah.
took all the other players on the board, but my first guy is Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt.
Okay.
I feel like this was the obvious number 1 pick in my mind. He won offensive MVP at the Shrine Bowl, didn't play at Arizona last year to eligibility issues, but I think that's also a good thing in a sense where I think he probably would have climbed up to being a 4th or 5th rounder if he did play all of last season, especially looking at how well he performed in that one game that he did play in at the start of the year against New Mexico. Looking at Washington's running back room, it's really crowded. You got B-Rob, you got Austin Eckler. Both their contracts expire after the 2025 season. They're not going to bring back both of those guys. We'll see if they bring back one. Jeremy McNichols is going to be 30 years old by the end of the season. And then in 2023 with New Mexico, Krosky Merritt had 39 runs of at least 10 yards, which was 10th most of any player in the FBS. He's very elusive, has great physicality, never is really scared to initiate contact, which is something that I really saw when watching him. He had the third highest avoided tackle rate of any running back in the 2025 class at 42%. And in 2023, which was really his breakout year, he forced 64 missed tackles, which was the 17th most throughout the nation. And then lastly, he's really good, just raw athletic traits. At the Big 12 Pro Day in March, he had 41.5-inch vertical, 10.5-inch broad jump, and ran a 4.41 40-yard dash. So when you look at a running back room where they're probably not going to bring back most of their top 3 guys, maybe they bring back one of those 3 players, and then or maybe one between Brian Robinson and Austin Eckler, and then McNichols is maybe gonna see that decrease in production when he turns 30. I think that they're gonna really try and implement Krosky Merritt throughout this season because 'cause I'm sure in their mind they have it that he could potentially be RB1 going forward, and I know Dan Quinn spoke extremely highly of him during training camp today.
Yes, Ja'Cory Crossy Merritt of Bill Crossy Merritt. He is a fan favorite for
Mhm.
sure,
Absolutely.
and it definitely was up on my board. I mean, Crossy Merritt again, the seventh round pick for this past draft. Just other things on him. I mean, he is someone like you mentioned. I think potentially, especially towards the end of this year, he starts to see more playing time, potentially even
Mhm.
sneaking into that maybe RB2 role, taking
I think he could
playing.
get RB1 by the end of the season, honestly.
Wow, yeah, that's
Mhm,
that's pretty crazy. Yeah,
we'll see.
there's potential there for
Mhm,
Bill. But all right, my first pick. To me, this guy was the clear number one. So it's
mhm,
funny that we have like a little difference here. But
mhm,
it's Brandon Coleman, the tackle slash guard for
mhm,
Washington. Last season, it was kind of an inconsistent year on the pass pro side for Coleman. He played mostly left tackle at the beginning of the year. He split basically split drives. Every other drive he basically
mhm,
played, and Cornelius Lucas played the other half of the drives, which was something that I've never seen before. And I don't
mhm,
I don't know when the last time that's happened
mhm,
where they plan to have a different left tackle every drive,
mhm,
but it ended up working. And Coleman eventually took over the left tackle spot and started playing entire games there. it was a little bit inconsistent, like I mentioned on the pass pro side. He had an 89.2 pass block grade in week 9 and an 86.2 pass block grade in week 12. So 2 very good games against the Giants and the Cowboys. But beyond that, there were some games where his grades were below 30 or below 20
Mhm.
even. So it was kind of all over the place on the pass pro side. He was more consistent as a run blocker, which I think is going to benefit him when he moves
Mhm.
inside to guard this upcoming season. He had a 62.4 run block grade, which again, if just to recap here of how PFF grades work, the 60 grade is a base grade. If you do basically what you're supposed to do, you'll get a 60 grade. Anything better than that is, a plus. Anything below that is a minus. So a 62.4 run block grade as a rookie is very good. It ranked 5th among rookie tackles last season. So again, as a run blocker, Coleman was pretty solid.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
now moving inside to guard, I would assume he's going to end up being the starting left guard for Washington. I know this team was very high on him. The debate coming out of college was if he was going to be a tackle or a guard in the future. And, we saw it with Sam Cosmi. Cosmi out there tackle kind of struggled early on in his career, but once he moved inside to guard, he became a Pro Bowler and almost, I think he was almost an All Pro. Not entirely there yet, but I think he was getting votes.
Mhm.
So it showed that it worked with Cosmi. We've seen it work with other, younger, you could say, players who have failed at the tackle position and moved inside to succeed at guard. I think Coleman, maybe he won't be at Sam Cosmi level next year, but I think we definitely see an improvement from Coleman and more consistency at that left guard position in 2025. So my pick here would be Brandon Coleman.
Yeah, I like that one, and now, going over to number 2, I think here's where I have Johnny Newton. He played in 16 games in 2024, 44 tackles, 19 solo tackles, 2 sacks, 1 forced fumble, fumble recovery, and then he was also named to Bucky Brooks' 2025 All Breakout team, where he kinda predicts some of his breakout candidates. So, it's always nice to have an analyst also kind of
Yeah.
see him as a guy who could take a big step this upcoming year. He played really well when Jonathan Allen was injured last season, which was for a
Mhm.
good portion of the year. And now he's behind Deron Payne on the depth charts, but I think he will be rotated in as a starter quite a bit this season. Maybe not a starter, but at least get a lot of snaps, much more than he saw last season. And then you look at Washington's defensive tackles. Payne's 28, Javon Kinlaw's 27, Newton is 22. Newton is clearly the youngest guy in that room. I think he is kind of the future of Washington's defensive line, one of those top guys that they're building for the future, with their kind of 2 timeline that they're doing right now. So I think they're gonna really shift into letting him get a lot more action this season. I think it's gonna be a breakout year for him.
Yeah, Johnny Newton, his performance against Chicago last year was something that really stood out to
Yeah.
me. It showed why he was a consensus first round pick prior to
Mhm.
his foot injury.
Mhm.
And even though it was a slow start, you could say his rookie year because of, broke one foot in his last year of college and then broke
Mhm.
the other foot in the pre draft process.
Yeah.
I mean, Newton's going to be a pretty major X factor on this defense, whether he breaks out or not. I think a lot is riding on his play just because without Jonathan Allen, I know Allen was hurt for a portion of last season, a good portion of last season, but
Mhm.
now they are really relying on Newton to be that guy on the defensive line alongside Deron Payne. And you have, Eddie Goldman behind him and Javon
Mhm.
Kinlaw and Dorrance Armstrong potentially moving, inside outside. He's the flexibility there. But I mean, Newton's going to have to definitely step up his production in
Mhm.
2025 if Washington, wants to see an improvement on their defensive line this upcoming season. All right.
Mhm.
So I feel that is the three, like first three picks. You can put
Yeah.
them, in any order you want, but here is where things kind of get, interesting. See where we go. I'm gonna go with Jordan McGee, the
Yeah.
linebacker from Temple, 5th round
Yeah.
pick back in 2024. Only 17 defensive snaps last season,
Mhm.
which is pretty crazy. It was a kind of a year just learning under some of these veterans. He dealt with injury for a good majority of last season and mainly played on special teams. But I think he is one of the players with the most pressure heading into this
Mhm.
preseason. We're going to see a lot of McGee. We're also going to see a lot of Kane Madrano, the rookie out of UCLA, and so those two linebackers this preseason, there's going to be a lot of eyes on them.
Mhm.
And McGee, I think, has the potential to, step up and, he doesn't have to be the main linebacker on this team because we have Bobby Wagner, we have Frankie Louvu. But like you mentioned with the Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt pick, a lot is, a lot's going to be decided and a lot's going to
Mhm.
be learned from this season between McGee and Medrano's play, uh, and kind of how Washington addresses the linebacker position after this season. And, does Bobby Wagner, the ageless wonder, go one more year? You can't really count on it. And so McGee is definitely probably in that long-term plan potentially. I think McGee has the potential to,
Mhm.
play more. Well, a healthy McGee definitely plays more than 17 defensive snaps this season,
Yeah.
but someone who I think could definitely break out this year for the Commanders.
100%. That's gonna be a crowded linebacker room, so it'll be interesting to see what kinda goes on there, and then I know we're getting into the UDFAs after this. They brought in
Hmm.
2 linebackers, as UDFAs, so I'll get into that later, but I don't think they're gonna see much of a role when you kinda balance,
Yeah.
Medrano and McGee. Now, my last player that I have is Quan Martin, um,
Okay.
and a lot of the reason I picked this one is because the coaches seem to um, be very positive about where he's at this season. During OTAs, Joe Witt Jr., who's the defensive coordinator, he said, quote, "This kid has potential to be one of the better safeties in the league." So I think that just goes to show how much confidence they have in Quan Martin entering year two. And he looked better towards the end of last season. And then I also think he's shown a lot of improvement this offseason. Showed that big play potential, obviously, the pick six against Detroit in the divisional round. And I think he's really just going to be able to thrive as Washington's top safety in 2025. He's playing alongside Will Harris, who I think brings something to the table, but isn't going to take anything away from Quan Martin. He can really be the free safety there by himself. And then Jeremy Chin is no longer there. Derek Forrest didn't play much last year, but he's no longer there. So the competition is just a lot less going into this season. And I think we're going to see a much greater role from him and a much better version of Quan Martin this year.
Yeah, and you mentioned how much Joe Witt and Dan Quinn have loved him. Ever since they came into the building, I feel like they've been praising Quan Martin. And
Mhm. Yeah.
now I think Quan could definitely be one of the players that sees the most improvement now
Mhm.
his second year under a learning Joe Witt scheme because Quan was
Mhm.
someone who they did not draft, right? And so he
Mhm.
kind of comes in and he's learning, Ron Rivera's kind of defense and the defense they have going on there
Mhm.
or whatever it was at that time. And, and then he had to change his sophomore
Mhm.
year, learn a completely new defense as well as some of these other guys, and uh, we saw improvement, especially towards the back half of the season. Like you mentioned, you could tell some of the players started to catch on more to some of the adjustments to the defense and all of
Mhm.
that. So heading into this season and entire second off season to learn and improve on Joe Witt's defense and his defensive scheme, I think we could see a pretty big jump from Quan Martin. That was a pretty good pick. That I think that would have been
Yeah.
my next pick too. So I'm gonna have to shift here for the
Mhm.
last pick. I've got who did I pick? I picked Coleman. I picked McGee. I'm gonna go with I'm gonna go with Jacob Martin, the
Mhm.
free agent
Yeah.
signing from Chicago. I think played very well. I think he played pretty well for Chicago in a limited role last season. He could be someone that could sneakily get 5 or so sacks for Washington this season.
Mhm.
It may not be, the production we got from Adante Fowler, but
Mhm.
if he can get to 5, 6, potentially 7 sacks this year, that could be pretty solid for this
Mhm.
Washington team. Just because you know, you have some of these other players that are definitely going to bring you some production. If you can get 5 plus sacks from kind of a depth guy, that'd be huge. And Martin was someone that I was talking to. I knew some like guys who watch the Bears, and so talking to them about it, they really liked Martin in a limited role in the kind of a pass rush as a pass rush specialist. And Martin, I think, could definitely be that for Washington this season. I will say that, it is kind of murky looking at the edge position in the depth, trying to figure out who will make this roster.
Mhm.
In my opinion, I feel like Martin has a very good chance, and Martin will most likely make this roster. But it is, weird seeing you've got Miller
Mhm.
now in the room. Wise also was a free agent addition. You still
Mhm.
have Clelin Ferrell as well in that room, and Javonte Jean-Baptiste,
Mhm.
who played quite a bit down the stretch last season too with some injuries. So it's kind of unclear who's going to be the odd man
Mhm.
out, and Martin could entirely be the odd man out. But I think Martin's as a pass rush specialist in a limited role could be very productive for Washington this upcoming year. So Martin would be my final pick here in this breakout draft. So I got
Also,
Coleman, McGee,
re
and Martin. Go ahead.
mhm. Real quick, can I add something,
Mhm.
before we wrap this draft up? The one other guy who I was kinda considering, and you just mentioned him, but I didn't pick him because he doesn't necessarily have that young age factor where he's gonna take a big step, getting older and more experienced, but it was Dietrich Weiss Jr.,
Mhm.
who came from New England. He turns 31 tomorrow, so he is on the older side. He doesn't have as much left to prove, but then during mandatory minicamp, he was the last guy off the field, so it kind of just goes to show, right? He still has that mentality that he wants to be the best guy. Nominated for the 2024 Walter Payton Man of the Year award, so I think that just also says like off the field, he's going to be a good mentor to a lot of the younger pieces on this defense. He's never played under 14 games in a season. Very consistent, very reliable. And then in New England, he was especially used on third downs, but we see Von Miller added, and Von Miller's primary role is going to be third and fourth downs, go in there, get the big play. So now if we start seeing him be used more on first or second downs, I think that's just going to lead to a lot more opportunities for him going forward.
Yeah, Wise was definitely an addition that I think, could was one that I liked
Mhm.
in free agency when they ended up signing him. Signed a couple of Patriots players along with Jonathan Jones as well in the secondary. But yeah, if you want to say the players you selected again as your breakout team, I guess.
Yeah, I had Ja'Cory Krosky Merritt, Johnny Newton, and Quan Martin.
Yeah, and then I had Coleman, McGee, and Jacob Martin. So
Mhm.
some names that ended up being left off. Ben Sinnott was an interesting one.
McCaffrey.
Um, Luke
He was
McCaffrey, yeah, Dom Hampton as well.
yeah,
Those were 3
he
guys all in the
he was
2024
one of my
class.
top 6 guys I was
Mhm.
considering.
Yeah, yeah. Other names I considered, I had Sinnott in my top 6 as well. So, yeah, it was
Mhm.
definitely an interesting one,
Mhm.
for sure. But let's move on now to the UDFAs on Washington's roster because every year, we've got some UDFAs to keep
Yep.
an eye on in training camps, some UDFAs that will make noise in the preseason. So I kind of just want to go through these UDFAs. Who are they? Learn more about them, and also what could they potentially bring this preseason? Because again, as UDFA, it is a long shot to make this roster, but it's not impossible. We saw Tyler
Mhm.
Owens do it, safety out of Texas Tech last year, and I definitely think he could be in play to make
Mhm.
the roster again this upcoming year.
Yep.
So it's not impossible. We see UDFA's do it, all the time, even though it is pretty rare. So I want to start here at the wide receiver position. And let's just start off with the big guy, the guy that
Mhm.
everyone's talking about. And
Mhm.
that's Ja'Cory Brooks, the wide receiver out of Louisville. 6'3,
Mhm.
195, five-star wide receiver coming out of IMG Academy in the class of 2021. It was the 2021 Cotton Bowl when he really broke out. He had 4 catches for 66 yards and a touchdown. When John Mechie got hurt for Alabama, he came in and produced for the Crimson Tide in that one. He had over 600 yards and 8 touchdowns in his sophomore year, but then suffered a shoulder injury in his junior year, which kind of really limited him. And he lost a lot of playing time because of that in Alabama's offense. So he ended up transferring to Louisville for his senior season, where he had the best season of his career: 61 catches, 1,013 yards, and 9 touchdowns. Was the main weapon for Tyler Shook last season. Ja'Cory Brooks is someone who's making noise in training camp so far. What
Mhm.
are your thoughts on him, Matthew?
Yeah, so I had it in my notes too that he was a 5-star out of high school. One of the top guys in that 2021 class, 27th ranked in the nation according to 24/7 Sports. And then last season 27th ranked in the nation, excuse me. Last year, he was 27th nationally in receiving yards, 20th in touchdowns. And then getting into what I've seen from training camp, right? He lined up with the starters on day 1. I don't know what his role looked like on day 2 and 3. I know he played well, but I don't know if he was out there with the starters. I know he was on day 1. He played on the outside, right? That's where we would have seen Terry play if he was there.
Mhm.
So he probably wouldn't have been out there with the starters if McLaurin was there. But at the same time, you're looking at wide receivers who can really prove themselves with the absence of McLaurin. And I think that Brooks has done a much better job with that than a guy like McCaffrey or a guy like Jalen Lane. He's really, gotten a lot of people to turn their heads. He doesn't have elite speed. He ran a 4.65 40-yard dash. And then he's 195 pounds. So maybe he struggles with that physicality off the line, or maybe in jump ball situations if he's not the biggest receiver. Um, but I do think he makes up for that with elite route running. And then
Mhm.
finishing off with Cam, he had 3 touchdowns in the first 2 days.
Yeah.
Again, I don't know what he looks like today. I know that today was primarily a defensive day. The defense really
Mhm.
shined today. But 2 of those were from Daniels, 2 of those touchdowns, 1 was from Mariota. And then there was also a video posted on X from Zach Selby yesterday showing that Brooks stayed after to get extra reps with Mariota and Josh Johnson. And I think I just really like that, having that UDFA mentality where you know that your roster spot's not guaranteed. You still have to prove something. So to see him working, extra time out there and really just building that trust and that connection with his quarterbacks is something I really love to see.
Yeah, yeah. Brooks is definitely going to be this year's this year this year's UDFA wide receiver
Mhm,
that's going to put on a show in the
mhm,
preseason games, and fans will want to have him on the roster. Which I think, compared to previous years, there is a pretty good chance, a UDFA wide receiver, or we don't really know what the wide receivers really
mhm.
5, 6, 7 look like. So
Yeah,
it's there's pretty much 2 spots at least up for grabs,
yeah.
if I would say, at the wide receiver position. And without Terry, again, we don't know really when he's going to be able to come back. But if you look at this wide receiver room without Terry, it's very kind of below average to really,
Mhm.
it's
Yeah.
below average slash unproven, because you still have some guys
Mhm,
like Jalen Lane and Luke McCaffrey who maybe have not, gotten the opportunity yet. But yeah, it's definitely a little bit scary looking at this
mhm.
room without Terry. So I'll just say that.
Yeah.
But yeah, Ja'Cory Brooks will definitely be a name to watch this preseason. There is one other wide receiver that is a UDFA in for Washington
Mhm,
right now, and that is Jacoby Jones, wide
mhm,
receiver of UCF. He's 24 years old, went to Northwest Mississippi Community College, then he transferred to Ohio, then transferred to UCF for his 5th year. You'll notice that for a lot of these UDFAs, they go to multiple schools. There's a lot
mhm,
of them that have
mhm,
traveled the world, traveled the country, but he did not play a lot, but had a couple of breakout games against Arizona and BYU. He had over 100 receiving
mhm.
yards in both those games. I would expect to see him a lot in later parts of preseason games. We'll just really have to wait and see with this one, I think, in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, with the name, it's kind of crazy that he's a wide receiver of all positions.
Yeah.
And then, 4.68 40-yard dash, similar to Brooks. He's not going to be the fastest guy out there.
Hmm.
And I think Brooks has shown other aspects of his game that are more enticing that we haven't necessarily seen from Jones yet. Obviously, he's gotten a smaller role so far. And then also the Commanders team website lists him at 6'3", but multiple websites list his UCF Pro Day measurements at 6'1", which I
Hmm.
thought was a really key component, because depending on which source is correct, Washington has a lot of receivers in that 6'6" range. So I
Yeah.
think him being able to add those 2 extra inches, if Washington's website is correct, would really just help him differentiate himself, in Washington's wide receiver room. But it'll be interesting to see what he can do going forward. I don't know if he'll make the team. It might be a long shot, but just another guy to keep an eye out for in training camp.
Yeah, you did mention. I mean, if he is 6'3", I mean, a 6'3", 228-pound
Yeah.
receiver is not something that Washington really has. So
Mhm.
that is someone to keep an eye on. All right, so those are the two wide receivers, but let's stay on the offensive side here and go with Tim McKay, the guard
Mhm.
out of NC State. And this one was really interesting to me because he's
Yeah.
6'4", 312 pounds. He's starting training camp on the active/non-football injury list
Mhm.
because he tore his pec muscle during NC State's pro day before the
Yeah.
draft. And that is a key reason why Washington got him as a UDFA
Mhm.
and he wasn't a day 3 pick. I really think McKay could be someone who could be a long-term depth piece on this
Mhm.
offensive line. His pass block rate improved every year while he was at NC State over the
Mhm.
last few years. So, what were your thoughts on McKay and kind of doing some research on him?
Yeah, I mean, I like this pickup for Washington. This seems like a low risk, high reward situation. When you consider that he was projected to be a mid round pick, after tearing or before tearing his pec at pro day, as you just mentioned. So maybe the guy with the highest upside out of all of their undrafted free agents. He doesn't have the best agility against very athletic defenders, but I do think he brings a lot of versatility on the line. He played 425 snaps at right guard in 2023 and 441 snaps at tackle. So you can really shift him around the offensive line, which is good when you see a guy like Sam Cosmi get injured. Maybe you have some injuries going forward, and it's like, if you need this guy to fill a role, you can bring him in no matter who the player is that got injured, no matter where they play. Um, but yeah, I do really like what I've seen from him. He had some good PFF grades, as you touched on, um, at NC State. So I think he was he was one of the players that Washington gave the biggest contract to. But I think
Mm.
it was only like 275,000, I think. So again, it's not much money. You're betting on a guy who could have definitely been a third or fourth round pick. I do like this addition for the Commanders.
Yeah, it's definitely one to keep an eye on. Potentially, these UDFAs that would end up making the roster. We'll have to look at, McKay's recovery time and all of that. But
Mhm.
definitely want to keep an eye on. All right, now going over to the defense side of the ball because Washington added quite a few defenders in terms of
Mhm.
UDFAs. We'll start with Ricky Barber on the defensive line
Yeah.
out of UCF. 2 years at Western Kentucky, 4 years at UCF. He had 26 pressures, 3 sacks last year. There's guys ahead of him on the depth chart, but I think I could see Barber as a potential practice squad player.
So he was teammate with Jacoby Jones at UCF as well. And when you look at his game, good strength, not great necessarily natural athleticism. But what really entices me about him is not what I'm seeing from him on the field, but it's actually the teams that were willing to take a chance on him. He went to some smaller schools, as you mentioned, Western Kentucky and then UCF. Coming out of high school, three-star recruit. He also received offers from schools such as Cincinnati, Indiana, Purdue, and then before transferring to UCF, he heard from Penn State and Tennessee. So it seems like he was kind of taking the approach of being a big fish in a small pond rather than a small fish in a big pond. And now we're going to see that kind of flip in Washington where he's going to be one of the lower end guys on this defense. So we'll see if he makes the team, if he's able to climb his way up. But I also like this pickup for Washington just based off the level of schools that were willing to take a chance on him.
Yeah, that was the only addition on the defensive line in terms of UDFAs. But we did mention this earlier. There were a couple of linebackers that
Yeah.
Washington added. Let's start with Ale Cajo, a linebacker out of UCLA. He was teammates with Kane Madrano and someone who has also quite a story. He's 25 years old going into his rookie year. He
Hmm.
played at Alabama from 2018 to 2020, transferred to UCLA, played there in 2021. He battled injuries for 2 years, missed the entire 2022 season, only played in one game in 2023, and then played last season, I believe, about 8 or 9 games for UCLA. Now, you see UCLA, you see linebacker. Ken Norton should be the thing that first comes to mind here.
Yes.
Ken Norton was the linebackers coach at UCLA for his in 2022 and in 2023. So Cajo only played in one game for Ken Norton, but I did see a quote that they are still pretty close, and you've got
Mhm.
to imagine that played a role in Cajo coming to Washington.
So I think there's two ways to look at this. Number one is you have that pre-built connection, which you love to see. But then on the other hand, you wonder, as a UDFA, how much of him getting this opportunity was due to Ken Norton and the fact that he's the linebackers coach for Washington. So maybe that diminishes, his chances and whether he was actually going to get a spot if it weren't for Ken Norton Jr. And then you touched on his age, obviously one of the older guys, teammates with Kane Madrano. He blocked 3 punts during his sophomore season at Alabama. That's one stat that I thought was interesting.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Um, and I think one of those was returned for a touchdown. So maybe at the best he can become a special teams guy. He can be used on the special teams, but I don't think he's probably going to emerge as a very relevant linebacker for this team going forward.
Yeah, it's definitely something to monitor. But I do also want to say that, like, that is also a common thing is players, joining teams because of connections.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
we see it all the time. So
Mhm,
that is also something to note there. The other linebacker that Washington added was Cam Arnold out of
mhm,
Boston College. He played all 5 years at Boston College at one school, which is not
mhm,
something that I don't think any of these other guys did.
mhm.
But he was a pretty good tackler at Boston College. He brings, like we mentioned, a lot more youth to a very young linebacker room behind Wagner and Louvu.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, you gotta chase around Zay Flowers during practice all day, but, his final season at Boston College was cut in half after suffering season-ending injury against Virginia Tech, so I don't know if that injury is still lingering, what the status of that injury is, but we didn't
Mhm.
fully get to see him, last year, and then one of my other notes is that he ran a 4.58 40 time, which would have been 6th among all linebackers at the combine. But you look at this, linebacker room, you have Wagner and Louvu obviously at the top. You have the next tier with McGee and Kane Madrano, those 2 younger guys. Nick Ballore, who they have to keep for special teams. Dominique Hampton, who's listed as a safety, but has really turned into a linebacker, and I think he'll probably be sliding in as a linebacker this year. There's just not a lot of opportunity in that linebacker room, so I think no matter how good these guys are, I think it's gonna be tough for them to earn a role, 2 guys to monitor, but I wouldn't bet on them making the team.
Yeah, and you brought up like another player who's pardon me, whose final college season cut short because of injury, and so he's basically recovering from an injury heading into the NFL draft, and that is something that we have seen Adam Peters and Dan Quinn not be afraid of in their first
Mhm,
two drafts. You look at Johnny Newton, I know
mhm,
Trey Amos as well was coming off of an injury that he
yeah,
suffered, I believe. So and now we look at Cajo, Arnold, some of these UDFAs, McKay, right? All of these
mhm,
guys who are still recovering from an injury by the time the draft rolls around. Washington is still willing to take a chance on these guys, which is a risk, but also, can be a reward because you can get these guys at maybe lower cost
mhm.
than what they may have gotten if they were healthy. So
Also, one other
that yeah.
one other guy is, Krosky Merritt, who was obviously not playing due to
Mhm.
eligibility issues, but I kinda touched on this earlier, it makes you wonder, would he have been drafted higher if he did play all of last season? So that's another guy who they're kind of betting on who they didn't get to see him all of last season, but he was
Mhm.
still very active with the team, he was attending meetings, he was practicing, he's still fresh, so he's another guy that maybe you look at really good value in the 7th round. I think one of the last 15 picks in the draft.
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, it shows they're not afraid to, draft guys that
Mhm.
may have, you're not entirely sure if they're fully healthy or if they've played in a while.
Yeah.
They're not worried about that.
Mhm.
But we've got a few guys left here in the secondary. We'll start with Carlin Vigors, the cornerback out of UL Monroe. Started at Independence Community College before transferring to UL Monroe, where he's played the last 3 years. he played basketball in high school, and in his senior year,
Mhm.
he averaged 17, 9, and 4, and 3 steals a game. That is
Yeah.
pretty good.
Uh,
So he's got the basketball background
mhm.
as well. He was someone that Washington, I believe, gave a good amount of guaranteed money to. It was at least a few 100,000. So definitely something to monitor. What are your thoughts on Vigors?
Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who I don't know too much about.
Hmm.
When I was doing my research, there were 2 things that stood out to me. He's gonna be 25 in less than a month. So he's
Yeah.
also up there in age, similar to Cajo, which is gonna make it harder for him to earn a spot. And then per PFF, he had a 17.5% missed tackle rate in
Hmm.
2024, which is slightly low, especially considering that this is a guy who has a background of playing safety. So I don't know how much to really value that stat or
Hmm.
what to think of that. But this is again with a very young secondary with
Yeah.
Amos, Quan Martin, Sanders still. These are all guys that are younger than him, and he's the UDFA rookie. So it's going to be hard for him to really differentiate himself and prove that he could be in the same tier as either of those guys who were drafted obviously a lot higher or drafted in the first place and are a lot younger.
Yeah. But these guys as well are going to get a lot of playing time in the preseason to prove themselves, along with Fentrell Cypress, the cornerback out
Mhm.
of FSU. 3 years at UVA before transferring to FSU for the last couple of years. He's a great tackler, and PFF charted it pretty well as well. 87.1 tackling grade last season. A lot of athletic ability, and someone that I think could definitely be, maybe a practice squad guy that gets called up for a few games due to injury.
Mhm.
If he doesn't get picked up, of course, by another team's active roster. Cypress is the second cornerback that Washington had as a UDFA. What are your thoughts on him?
Yeah, he's another guy that maybe lacks a little bit of size.
Hmm.
6 foot, 182 pounds. And I know that the average cornerback weight is like 190, so it's not a crazy difference, but maybe there's a little worry regarding his strength and physicality as a slightly smaller cornerback. And then the one thing that I'll end with that I've seen is that he is much better as his own defender.
Hmm.
May show some struggles with man coverage early on. So if that's something we could potentially see him get better at on the practice squad, I think that would be his key to potentially getting elevated in the future.
Yeah, I would expect Washington to play a lot of man coverage this season with
Mhm.
Lattimore out there, Sanders still. So that is the cornerbacks. One last UDFA here. Robert McDaniel, the safety out of Jackson State, one of the best safeties in the FCS last season. He's a great run stopper. I believe he had like a 90 plus PFF run stopping grade. In a weak safety room, he could potentially steal a spot. I know we've got some guys, and it'd be kind of hard to cut, a Jeremy Reeves, and the Percy Butler's extension kind of makes it a little bit harder as well to make this roster. But McDaniel has an opportunity, in my opinion, in the safety room.
Yeah, I mean, this is the guy who I probably know the least about, but
Mhm.
you mentioned how this is an open safety room. You have Harrison Martin at the top, Butler and Reeves, and then Tyler Owens and Ben Nickel, and you don't really have a fourth guy for either free safety or a strong safety. So I wouldn't say I know enough about him to really speak on his game compared to some of these other guys. But I do just think that if you're a safety for Washington right now, one of their weaker positions, one of the positions I'm most concerned about, if you're able to really prove yourself if this offseason, I think they'll at least want to keep him as a practice squad guy, knowing that this isn't the strongest safety room in the league and they may eventually need to resort to him.
Yeah, McDaniel was definitely someone. He's 25 as well, so
Mhm.
it's definitely a lot of these UDFAs are on the older side. Trying to look for his guaranteed money. He was guaranteed 180,000, so a
Mhm.
little bit less than some of these other guys. But again, standard UDFA contract, 3 years, but not a lot of guaranteed money. So that is though going to be a wrap on all of the UDFAs and on this episode. So Matthew, I want to thank you for coming on and also give you one more chance here to plug your stuff and where can people find your work?
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. Again, on YouTube at DMV_football. And then on Twitter at Matthew_Haven. I post links to pretty much everything I do there. I also started a Substack the other day. It's, I believe, heisermanshuddle.substack.com. I also post links on Twitter whenever I have an article come out over there. So that's where you can kind of just see everything that I'm doing recently. But yeah, I appreciate you having me on. This is a great episode.
Yeah, thank you for coming on. Well, there's a lot to be excited about. We've
Mhm.
got football by the time this episode comes out, just a little bit over a week away. Commanders football is back, and
Mhm.
we've got fans back at practices now. It's going to be a lot of fun over these next few weeks. I'm super excited for it. Matthew, again, thank you for coming on. But that's going to wrap up this week's episode of Keeping Up with the Commanders. See you guys in the next one. Peace.